In the dim glow of history's shadowy corridors, few stories resonate with the raw, unfiltered horror that marked the final moments of Askew. Imagine a noblewoman, once educated and spirited, now strapped tightly to a rack, her body stretched painfully, each joint protesting under the relentless pressure. Whispers of prayer escape her trembling lips as flames crackle ominously nearby, casting flickering shadows over her anguished face. The scene is not just a story of faith. It is a testament to the brutal cruelty inflicted in the name of power, religion, and control. Yet, even amid this torment, Anne's spirit remains unbowed, her defiant prayer piercing the chaos of her suffering. You might have heard fleeting stories of her martyrdom, heroic tales celebrating her courage. But behind these simplified narratives lies a far more horrifying reality. Her death was not only brutal, it was a calculated act of cruelty designed to crush her will and silence her voice forever. The suffering she endured was more than physical pain. It was psychological warfare, an unthinkable assault on her very dignity and humanity. Her whispered prayers, her resilience in the face of relentless torture, reveal a woman who refused to abandon her faith despite the unimaginable violence inflicted upon her. The core question we must confront is this: why does Askew's execution stand out as one of the most horrifying episodes in English history? To understand this, we need to peel back layers of myth, ritual, and brutality that often surround tales of martyrdom. What most people don't realize is how systematically her suffering was engineered by those who believed that the torture would not only punish her, but also serve as a stark warning to others. The scene at the scaffold was horrific not just in its violence, but in its cold orchestration, an act meticulously designed to terrify not just Anne, but anyone daring to oppose the religious authorities of her time. This story isn't just history. It's a mirror reflecting our ongoing debates about human rights, conscience, and justice. The barbarity inflicted upon Anne asks uncomfortable questions about the limits of human cruelty and the silence that often follows such atrocities. Her story compels us to examine how far societies have come, and how much remains to be done to prevent such horrors from recurring. As we explore her final moments, remember that her suffering was not just personal. It was a brutal, systemic assault on individual liberty and faith. In the tumultuous landscape of 1540s England, the nation was a powder keg of religious, political, and social upheaval. King Henry VIII's reign was marked by radical shifts, notably his break from the Roman Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England. This break was not merely theological. It carried profound political and cultural consequences, plunging the country into chaos. As Henry dissolved monasteries, confiscated church lands, and redefined religious doctrine, the nation found itself torn between loyal Catholics and the emerging Protestants advocating reform. These internal conflicts often turned violent, and the once unified religious landscape rapidly fractured into factions vying for power and influence. The religious landscape was especially volatile. England was caught between the old faith, deeply rooted in centuries of tradition, and the new Protestant ideas that challenged papal authority and emphasized personal faith and scripture. The upheaval was not purely ideological, it affected every social class, from nobles to commoners, and bred suspicion, paranoia, and persecution. Heresy, perceived as a threat to the monarch's authority and the stability of the realm, became a crime punishable by death. Laws were enacted swiftly under Henry's reign, targeting those accused of dissent, often relying on means of interrogation and torture to extract confessions. The enforcement was relentless. Anyone who questioned the state-endorsed religious doctrine risked brutal punishment, fostering an atmosphere of fear. Geographically, the Crown's power was concentrated around strategic sites like the Tower of London and Smithfield. The Tower served as a royal prison, where many accused heretics and political enemies were held before their executions. Smithfield, on the other hand, became infamous as a public execution site, where the violence was used both as punishment and as a brutal form of social control. These sites were more than just locations, they symbolized the state's authority and the horrifying spectacle of religious persecution. Crowds gathered, often eager for blood, witnessing the suffering of condemned individuals as a warning to others who might dissent. The atmosphere in this era was heavy with systematic brutality. The machinery of state and church combined to wield brutal force against those deemed heretics. Torture devices like the rack, inquisitorial questioning, and other methods of physical and psychological torment were frequently used to break individuals' spirits and extract confessions or repentance, often under threat of death. This systematic persecution was rooted in the belief that purging heresy was necessary to secure spiritual salvation and political stability. Yet, behind the scenes, it also reflected a core brutality, an unflinching readiness to impose suffering on those who dared express dissent, regardless of their social rank. In this turbulent backdrop, Askew's story emerges as even more striking. A woman of noble birth, highly educated and resolutely Protestant, her defiance came at a cost, placing her directly at odds with the state and the church authorities. Her case epitomized the peril faced by those caught in the web of religious conflict. Her story is not just about faith. It is about resistance against an oppressive regime that wielded violence as a tool to suppress individual conscience. The barbarity of the era was designed to crush dissent, making her courage and resilience all the more extraordinary. Askew stands at the heart of this dark chapter in English history, a woman whose life and death embody both personal conviction and the brutal machinery of religious persecution. Born into a noble family, she was well educated for a woman of her time, possessing a fierce intelligence and unwavering religious devotion that set her apart in a society increasingly torn by confessional conflicts. Her personal background tells of a woman who challenged societal expectations, married young to a man she presumably did not love, yet she would become best known not for her social standing, but for her relentless advocacy for Protestant reform. Her boldness in speaking openly about her faith and her refusal to recant branded her a heretic in the eyes of the authorities, sealing her fate. Opposing her were figures whose motives ranged from political jockeying to zealous religious fervour. Thomas Wriothesley, a lesser-known figure perhaps, and Sir Richard Rich, a prominent lawyer and politician, played pivotal roles in her interrogation and torture. Wriothesley's involvement highlights the state's formal machinery mobilized against her, while Sir Richard Rich, later infamous for his role in prosecuting religious dissenters, embodies the theme of power wielded ruthlessly in the service of state and church. Their participation in her torment underscores how those in authority often use torture as both punishment and interrogation, pushing the boundaries of cruelty in the name of religious conformity. At the political pinnacle was Henry VIII himself. His shift from Catholic monarch to the head of the Protestant Church had led to violent upheavals, including the persecution of those deemed heretics. While Henry's personal involvement in Askew's trial remains somewhat indirect, more a reflection of the broader political and religious upheaval, his policies and declarations created an oppressive environment for dissenters. Religious authorities, often under royal decree, wielded enormous influence over the judicial process, ensuring the heresy was met with unforgiving punishment. Supporters and witnesses to her story, however, add a layer of complexity. Underground Protestant networks, scattered across England, provided Anne with moral support, encouragement, and perhaps a clandestine platform to share her writings and spiritual reflections. Some of her friends risked their lives to aid her, embodying the clandestine resistance that defied the brutal state machinery. After her death, reactions among the broader populace ranged from admiration to horror. Some Catholics questioned the brutality inflicted upon her, recognizing her steadfast faith amid her suffering. These witnesses serve as a reminder that even amidst such institutional cruelty, individual acts of courage and dissent shone through. Through these figures, her resolute persona, her oppressors driven by power and ideology, and her secret supporters, the story of Askew reveals the profound clash between conscience and authority. Each played a role in shaping not just her tragic end, but the legacy of resistance that would inspire future generations. Her unwavering faith in the face of tyranny, her defiance under torture, and the stark contrast between her silenced body and her unbroken spirit make her story timeless. Askew's story reaches one of its darkest and most harrowing moments when her arrest and subsequent torture reveal the brutal mechanisms of religious persecution in Tudor England. Her daring defiance and unwavering faith placed her directly in the crosshairs of the authorities, who sought to crush her spirit through a brutal campaign of interrogation and physical torment. It all began with her arrest, an act that seems almost incidental at first glance, but in truth marked the start of a nightmare designed to break her physically and psychologically. A devout Protestant, Anne had openly expressed her beliefs in defiance of the Catholic orthodoxy enforced by the Crown. Her refusal to recant her faith, despite threats and pressure, made her a prime target. When she was finally detained, she faced a relentless interrogation aimed at extracting her confession or at least intimidating her into silence. The initial interrogations were designed not only to obtain her renunciation, but also to extract information about her contacts and fellow Protestants. However, Anne remained resolutely silent, her steadfastness a source of both awe and fury for her tormentors. It was during this time that they decided to employ increasingly cruel tactics, most notoriously the rack. The decision to use the rack marked a turning point in Tudor persecution. Although torture was technically illegal under common law, it was often employed in cases of heresy, where the state's interest in eradicating what it considered dangerous dissent outweighed legal niceties. For a noblewoman like Anne, torture was especially shocking. It was an act often reserved for common criminals or traitors, but now wielded as a tool to extract confessions from a woman whose only crime was her faith. Physically, the rack was a horrifying device. It consisted of a wooden frame with rollers and ropes, designed to stretch the victim's body, dislocating joints and tearing tendons in a process that could last for hours or even days. For Anne, the torture was prolonged and meticulous. Her limbs painfully pulled in alternating directions, each jerk sending waves of agony through her body. Witnesses noted her screams, but even more striking was her remarkable resilience. Despite the excruciating pain, she refused to betray her beliefs or her fellow Protestants. Psychologically, her torment was compounded by threats, promises, and attempts at manipulation. Torturers taunted her with the promise of mercy if she recanted, but she remained unyielding. She understood that her suffering was not only about her individual fate, but also a political act meant to serve as a warning to others. Her resistance, silent but fierce, became a form of moral courage that shocked her tormentors and onlookers alike. Throughout her ordeal, Anne's writings from prison reveal her inner spiritual strength. She composed prayers and reflections, maintaining her faith amid chaos. Her unwavering conviction provided her a mental fortress, even as her body was pushed beyond its limits. Her resistance posed a direct challenge to the authorities' attempt to break her. Their brutal tactics only underscored her extraordinary resolve. This harrowing chapter, her arrest, her unbreakable stance during interrogation, and her endurance through the physical torment, demonstrates the depths of human cruelty faced by those who dared to hold dissenting beliefs. It also highlights her remarkable moral resilience. Despite the fear, pain, and humiliation inflicted upon her, Anne's spirit continued to shine through, refusing to capitulate to the brutality meant to silence her voice. As Askew was led to the scaffold, her body battered and disfigured from the relentless torture she had endured, onlookers could hardly believe her resilience. Though her limbs trembled and her face was pale from pain, she refused to be broken. Supporters later recounted that she was carried in a chair, her injuries too severe for her to walk unaided. Yet even in this weakened state, she exhibited a quiet defiance. When the time came to speak, she thrust aside her fears, and with a voice firm despite her suffering, she raised her voice above the roaring crowd. From her seat, she began to preach openly, declaring her unwavering faith and love for Christ, daring to confront the authorities with her courage. The scene at the stake was meticulously prepared yet horrifying in its brutality. Firewood and gunpowder had been arranged to burn quickly, but the execution was designed to maximize pain and spectacle. As the fire was set ablaze, a strong gust of wind fanned the flames and ignited the gunpowder, producing a deafening explosion that jolted witnesses and sent a blackened cloud of smoke billowing upward. The flames quickly enveloped her, but her body did not perish instantly. Instead, she endured a prolonged agony, her flesh scorched, her body racked with burning pain. Witnesses later described how the flames flickered against her trembling form, the suffocating smoke filling the air as she clenched her eyes and offered silent prayers. The most gruesome aspect of her execution was the extension of her suffering. The fire, cleverly arranged, was meant to deny immediate death, forcing her into a torturous prolongation of agony. Many reports speak of her trying to stay upright, clutching her chest or raising her voice in prayer, even as her body was consumed. Some witnesses swore they saw her raise her right hand, as if to make a final gesture of defiance or faith before succumbing to the flames. Her last moments have been etched into history not only because of her steadfastness, but because of the sheer violence inflicted upon her, an act of state-sanctioned barbarity designed to crush her spirit and serve as a stark warning to others. Contemporary accounts, written by those who viewed her martyrdom, paint a harrowing picture. One witness described how she remained upright, her lips moving in silent prayer, even as her flesh was melted away by the fire. Another recounted how she looked upward, a serene expression on her face, unshaken in her faith. Such stories struck terror into the hearts of many who saw her, but they also inspired a profound sense of awe. Despite the chaos and violence, Anne's unwavering stance amidst excruciating suffering transformed her from a victim into a symbol of resistance and faith. The emotional impact on onlookers was multifaceted. For some, her courage ignited a newfound resolve in their own beliefs. For others, it deeply disturbed them, forcing them to confront the cruelty humans could inflict in the name of faith and authority. Many remembered her final act of preaching from the scaffold as a testament to her defiance, a powerful moment of spiritual strength that transcended her physical suffering, revealing that even in death, her spirit refused to be broken. The story of Anne Askew's final days and brutal execution has long fascinated historians, but it wasn't until centuries later that we began to uncover the full extent of her suffering and the truth embedded within the sparse yet revealing records. These documents, trial transcripts, court records, eyewitness accounts, and Anne's own writings serve as invaluable windows into one of the most harrowing moments in English history. Each piece of evidence helps us piece together not only her physical ordeal, but also her unwavering spirit amid unimaginable cruelty. Much of what we understand about Anne's persecution originates from official court records, which detail her arrest, her interrogations, and her eventual trial. These documents reveal a systematic attempt by authorities to break her resolve, to extract confessions, and to silence her Protestant testimony. Her interrogators employed ruthless methods, including physical torture and psychological manipulation, recorded meticulously in the records. The court transcripts show her steadfast refusal to recant her faith, despite the mounting dangers, highlighting her remarkable courage. Interestingly, some records mention her composed demeanor and her ability to quote scripture even during the most brutal moments, testaments to her deep conviction and spiritual resilience. Beyond official records, personal writings by Anne Askew, poetry and reflections crafted during her imprisonment offer an intimate glimpse into her inner life. These writings, discovered centuries later, echo her unwavering faith and her ability to find solace and strength through prayer. One of her most famous poems captures her spiritual defiance, asserting her trust in divine justice despite earthly cruelty. These texts serve as powerful evidence of her mental and spiritual fortitude, providing a stark contrast to the physical torment inflicted upon her. Eyewitness accounts from individuals who observed her ordeal further deepen our understanding of her suffering. Some witnesses, perhaps prison guards or other prisoners, documented her resilience and even her acts of defiance. These testimonies describe her as trembling but unbroken, her spirit shining through her suffering. In particular, some accounts describe her attempting to preach or pray aloud at her execution, which shocked many observers. Such accounts help us grasp the profound moral and emotional impact she had on those who watched her final moments, and they highlight how her courage transcended her pain. Modern historians analyze these sources with a critical eye, often correlating court records with Anne's writings and eyewitness reports to build a comprehensive picture. From these analyses, it becomes evident that Anne Askew's resistance was not merely defiance but an act of moral and spiritual rebellion against state and religious persecution. Her writings, in particular, are regarded as some of the earliest expressions of individual religious conscience and human dignity in the face of systematic violence. In recent decades, scholars have continued to unearth new details and interpret these historical pieces in fresh ways. For example, some have examined the language used in her trial transcripts, noting the subtle ways she resisted attempts to silence her or conform. Others focus on her poetry, analyzing her spiritual reflections as acts of political defiance, sacred resistance against oppressive authority. These discoverers make clear that Anne's story is not just about her execution, but about the enduring human spirit seeking truth and justice amid relentless cruelty. In sum, the convergence of legal records, personal writings, and eyewitness testimonies has transformed our understanding of Anne Askew's martyrdom from a vague historical event into a vivid, harrowing narrative of resilience, faith, and resistance. Anne Askew's martyrdom was more than a tragic end for a single woman. It became a rallying point that resonated through the years, shaping future religious thought, legal principles, and ideas about individual conscience. Her unwavering resistance in the face of unimaginable cruelty challenged the very foundations of authority and morality during her time, leaving behind a legacy that still echoes today. In the realm of religious and legal history, Anne's sacrifice ignited a profound awareness of the injustices inflicted upon those who dared to hold beliefs contrary to the established order. Her brutal torture and execution exposed the brutality of Tudor persecutions and fueled resistance among Protestant reformers. Her story underscored the dangerous consequences of state-sponsored religious suppression and highlighted the urgent need for reforms in justice and law. Over time, her case contributed to a broader conversation about the legitimacy of using torture to extract confessions and the importance of due process, conversations that eventually influenced the development of legal protections and rights. Culturally and spiritually, Anne Askew's writings and legacy inspired countless reformers and thinkers. During her imprisonment, she composed powerful prayers, poems, and reflections that expressed a deep, personal faith rooted in conviction rather than fear. Her poetry, some of which was discovered long after her death, continues to be celebrated for its raw honesty and spiritual resilience. Her story became a symbol of courageous faith, one that dared to proclaim truth even in the face of death. Across Europe, her martyrdom motivated reformers to question religious tyranny and championed the rights of individuals to pursue spiritual truth with integrity. Beyond immediate religious impacts, Anne's story contributed to the evolution of ideas surrounding human rights. Her unwavering stance against torture and her willingness to face death rather than betray her conscience provided a stark example of individual moral agency. This act of defiance challenged the worldview that rulers or institutions had absolute authority over a person's conscience and body. Over centuries, her story helped shape notions of personal liberty, the importance of conscience, and the moral imperative to protect individuals from state violence, principles that underpin modern human rights law. Her enduring influence can also be seen in the way her story inspires ongoing debate about justice, faith, and the limits of human endurance. By understanding the depths of her suffering and her refusal to surrender her beliefs, modern audiences are prompted to reflect on the importance of standing up for one's principles even when faced with overwhelming adversity. Anne exemplifies the power of faith and moral conviction, not as a means of glorification, but as a vital force for resistance against injustice. Her legacy reminds us that history is not merely a record of distant events, but a continuous call to confront cruelty and uphold justice. In a broader sense, the reflection on Anne Askew's life and death offers valuable lessons for today's world. Her story underscores the dangers of unchecked authority and the necessity of defending individual rights, religious freedom, and moral integrity. It compels us to acknowledge and remember the suffering inflicted in the name of righteousness, and to remain vigilant against similar abuses of power. Anne Askew's story is a haunting reminder of the brutal human capacity for cruelty in the name of faith and authority. Her unwavering courage in facing unimaginable suffering leaves us with profound questions about the nature of justice, the limits of human endurance, and the cost of standing by one's beliefs. As we reflect on her life and death, it becomes clear that her martyrdom was not just a tragic event in history, but a stark lesson that echoes through the ages. When we think about her ordeal, the torture, the prolonged agony, the public spectacle, we are confronted with the dark reality of institutional violence. Her physical suffering was compounded by the psychological torment of knowing that her defiance could cost her everything. Yet, despite the pain, she remained steadfast, her faith unshaken, her resolve unbroken. This resilience in the face of systematic brutality forces us to ask, what are the limits of human endurance? And how can faith, whether religious or moral, provide strength amid such suffering? Her story also underscores the importance of individual conscience and the perilous consequences of standing against oppressive regimes. And Askew refused to betray her beliefs, even when faced with death. Her refusal highlights the profound moral courage required to challenge injustice, even when it means risking one's life. It prompts us to consider our own commitments. Are we willing to stand firm in our convictions in the face of adversity? What sacrifices are we prepared to make to uphold what we believe is right? Furthermore, her death sheds light on the destructive power of state-sponsored persecution. Her execution was not merely an act of punishing heresy, but a calculated display intended to intimidate and suppress dissent. It reminds us of the importance of protections for individual rights and due process, values that are still contested in many parts of the world today. Learning about her suffering encourages us to be vigilant against the erosion of justice and the recurrence of atrocities carried out under the guise of righteousness. But beyond the horror, Anne's legacy endures through her writings and the stories told about her resilience. Her poetry and reflections from prison continue to inspire future generations to advocate for freedom of conscience, human dignity, and reform. Her suffering became a beacon, illuminating the need for reforming governmental and religious institutions that still, at times, prioritize power over humanity. By understanding her story deeply, we recognize that the fight for justice and individual rights is ongoing. Her death exposes the potential cruelty within human institutions, but it also highlights the enduring power of personal conviction. Her sacrifice encourages us to cherish and protect the rights we hold dear, to remain vigilant against tyranny, and to value the courage it takes to stand by our beliefs. Ultimately, what lessons does an Askew's martyrdom teach us? Perhaps most profoundly, it reminds us that the struggle for truth and justice often comes at great cost. Her story invites us to reflect on the importance of compassion, resilience, and moral conviction. It challenges us to consider how we can learn from history's darkest moments to build a future rooted in justice, compassion, and respect for human dignity. As we close this reflection, let's remember that her suffering was not in vain. Her unwavering faith and moral strength continue to inspire acts of resistance and hope. In a world still marred by injustice and violence, her story serves as a stark warning and a call to action. We owe it to her memory and to the countless others who have suffered in silence to ensure that such horror remains a thing of the past, never repeated.